Do you currently own the Festool Parallel Guides? Are you trying to figure out how to get narrow rips for your projects using thin stock materials? If you answered yes to either one of those questions, make sure you stick around in this video as I show you how to get narrow rips using your Festool Parallel Guides. Hey, I'm Ben Marshall and welcome back to my channel. If you've never been here before, I like to release monthly content centered around Festool and all things Festool. If that's something that interests you, make sure you subscribe. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make narrow rips on your narrow stock using the Festool Parallel Guides and my favorite track saw, the TS75. Now, something that is really important to realize when it comes to the parallel guides, especially the Festool ones, is that there is a bit of a setup process that goes with it. If you want to see how to calibrate and set up the parallel guides to your favorite guide rail, make sure you click in the link to the video above. Now, before I get into the materials that we're going to need and the process itself, I do want to point out that getting narrow rips, especially on narrow milled stock, is somewhat of a challenge when it comes to using the Festool Parallel Guides. They are much easier to use on flat panels like plywood or other sheet goods. And so again, whenever it comes to ripping narrow stock, especially milled stock, there is a bit of a learning curve and it can be kind of finicky at times. So just going into it, understand that the process is a little bit challenging. However, it is totally possible if this is all that you have the space for, meaning the track saw, the guide rail, and just the parallel guides. It is 100% possible to get narrow rips on milled stock using the parallel guides. So some things that we're going to need to do this. You're going to need some type of a flat surface to rest your materials down on. I've got this really old kind of rickety workbench. However, any flat surface is going to allow you to do this. However, I recommend that you do it on a surface that can be sacrificial, because you are going to be cutting through all this narrow stock onto whatever it is that's below you. And so my first recommendation, you don't have to have this, but my recommendation for ripping pretty much anything is to get some of this insulation foam board. You can pick it up from Lowe's or Home Depot. You can buy them in a big 4x8 sheet. I just take a little handsaw with me whenever I go to pick some up, and I cut it down into 4 equal parts, which allows me to store it inside my vehicle and in my workshop, and it's just not really bulky. This is really handy, again, because if you have to break down materials outside of your shop and you don't want to risk ruining your blades, this is a perfect sacrificial surface for making any kind of rips or cuts. So again, this is an option. Don't have to have it, but I highly recommend it. So the next thing we're going to need is obviously a long enough guide rail to accommodate the length of the stock that we're trying to rip. Here I have a 1900 millimeter guide rail from Festool. I already have the Festool parallel guides attached to my guide rail. Again, if you want to see that setup video, click in the link above. I have my pre-milled stock. I haven't cut off the edges yet. However, I have planed both surfaces to my project thickness. Safety equipment, and then TS75. So the first step that you really want to take when ripping narrow stock with the Festool Parallel Guides is obviously we want to calibrate the parallel guides, which I've already done and I've already mentioned before in this video. The next thing we're going to want to do is you want to take off the positioning keys or the positioning blocks from the parallel guides, just because it's going to get in the way of us trying to rip our boards. So the first cut that we're going to do on all of these boards, and we're going to batch these out, is I want to rip all of my reference edges from these boards. And so you just pick a side pretty much, or an edge that you want to rip. On this board, I've got a little bit of live edge right here on this side, and I've got a really wicked crack right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rip down this one edge here. That'll become my reference surface for my parallel cuts. And again, I'm going to do that on all 4 of my thin stock boards. And again, all I'm worried about right now is just ripping one edge. This will become my reference surface, and then I'll worry about getting the proper width with the parallel cuts after I get all my reference edges done. So one thing that can be kind of tricky when you're doing narrow stock is you want to make sure that the guide rail has enough surface underneath of your stock to maintain balance. And so you can see as I push down on the edge here how the parallel guide has a tendency to tip. And so what I'm going to do is just take some of my additional stock and I'm going to slide it up underneath, and that's going to help give it a little bit of support, so that way as I go to do my rips down, it's not going to teeter, because I do want to make sure that I have a nice perpendicular edge off of the surface here. So I've already got my power and dust collection set up on my track saw. I'm going to drop my splinter guard down, check my plunge depth, and then I'm going to rip my surface edge. So that's the process that I'm going to take with all of my boards, on one side of each of my boards. And then whenever I come back, we'll start setting the parallel width, and we'll start ripping from there. Now that I've got the reference edge on my stock cut, now I'm going to install the positioning keys back onto the parallel guides on the parallel guide extensions to the appropriate width that I want to do my rips, my parallel rips at. And once I have that set, then I can just start processing the boards through, ripping them as they go along. One thing that I've found that makes this process really easy is to kind of think of this as like an assembly line. So if I have to do multiple rips of the same width, I'm going to have one board underneath and then the next board directly behind it. What this does is it helps support the guide rail as I'm making all of my rips, and then I just kind of continue to bump the boards through in this direction until all of the rips are done. I have a few boards that are pretty narrow, more narrow than this table is, and because of how the Festool Parallel Guide extensions are, which allow for the blade to pass through the guides without cutting it, you have to have at least 4 inches of clearance in order for to be able to use the extensions on flat surfaces. So that's why at the very beginning of the video I recommended that you pick up some insulation board, because I can now stack this or double it up, which will elevate everything off the table and give me clearance for those extensions. But because I can cut or rip on this surface first, I'm going to do that with my longest board. I'm going to have to adjust my parallel guide here. So I've already got the appropriate width, and so now I need to help support it. And what I want to make sure is, before I come and rip, you really want to make sure that you have this thing pulled tight up against your material. And this is the challenge of ripping with narrow stock with these parallel guides. It's very easy for the narrow stock to come off of your positioning blocks. And so throughout this process, you really do want to make sure that you have positive pressure going against the stock itself, because you don't want that board shifting around. But the challenge is that you don't want to bind it underneath, because then there may be a chance of kickback if there's too much pressure on the sides of the blade. So what I like to do is just use the palm of my hand, press it up against that supporting stock, and then with my fingers I grab the rail and I pull it nice and tight, so it's just hand pressure. Okay, and then just like an assembly line, that board comes off. You push the board underneath forward, just like so. And it looks like we're not going to have enough to do a rip on that one. But that's the process, is if you're doing the same parallel rips or the same width on all of your rips, you just keep passing the board underneath here, pushing it forward. You're still keeping that board supported underneath, or the guide rail supported so that it doesn't flop around. But again, in this case, because I've only got really one long board, I'm going to have to make some adjustments. But theoretically, if you had boards that were all the same length, as one gets cut and you need support, you just take the one that you just cut, put it up underneath, and then the process just continues like that. So again, once you get this thing set up, depending on how your workshop is laid out, it can be a relatively quick process. There's more steps in making sure that your rips are going to be nice and accurate. So again, can't use this one. I might be able to use this one on, well, we'll be able to use it on the other dimensions from other boards. So I'm going to continue processing these boards using this method. I will adjust my width of my cut for the rest of my project, and I'll see you at the conclusion. So that's how you get narrow rips using the Festool Parallel Guides using thin stock. Now obviously this method of ripping narrow stock, there are lots of opportunities for different methods of doing this. And so if you have a different way, make sure you share it in the comments below for other people to learn and grow. If you found this video helpful, make sure you give it a like or even give it a comment. If you would like to see more content like this, make sure that you subscribe to this channel as I release videos every month. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.